Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for an all new episode recap of today's Days of Our Lives, August 5th, 2025. So we start off with Rafe and Gabby. They're just checking in with each other. Rafe said that he has an important meeting as well as Gabby. Gabby said that she has an important meeting with Xander. She decides to yet again prod into Rafe's professional life about, who's he meeting up with. I guess she didn't want to go into further details this time around, but she also said, at least do you have any interesting cases coming up? And he said, it's not really interesting right now. She asked him if he has a partner and he didn't tell her, right? So I know already that, he doesn't really want to let Gabby into what he's doing, and that's also okay, right? Gabby's just too nosy. So after the whole thing with Kat and Chad, Marlena went to her appointment with Sarah, and Sarah tells her that look, everything else checks off. She can't seem to pinpoint what is going on with her physically. Maybe it's an underlying condition, maybe it's fibromyalgia, something else. So they don't really know what is going on with her. Outside of that, just can hope that things work out in the end. She also asked her about her if she went to any grief counseling meetings. She said that she has been going to see another therapist, and it's been going well in the first session. She also asked Sarah how she's doing otherwise, and she said that she legally separated from Xander, and she's asking Sarah how she managing that. So she said that it needed to be done. It was very peaceful and amicable, and they're doing it for the sake of their daughter. And she feels at peace doing that, right? Marina understands how that is, and she said that look, that relationship was pivotal to most of your life. You're okay to have any type of feelings that will come up, just embrace them. So she thanks Marlena for listening to her and appreciates her for being there for her. And she said that look, enough about me, more about you, and just know that we are also here for you as well. And Marlene is thankful to have her family and friends in her corner to support her in any way. She tells her that Chad and Kat were stuck in the elevator the whole night, and she said, are they okay? And she said yes, they're okay. And Sarah said that she was just talking to EJ about fixing the elevator on time, and if only he just did that, that wouldn't have happened, right? So speaking of Chad and Kat, they're outside the elevator now, and Felicity was happy to see that her sister's okay, and she went back to work. And Chad and Kat are talking amongst each other because Julie, on yesterday's episode, Julie's face was just, the nastiest face that she could give to Kat, being there with Chad all alone in the elevator. So her disdain for her was definitely shown up today. She was behaving like a big bitch to me, honestly. And Marlene had to bring her to the side and say, look, like, I know that you don't really care for Kat, but, can you just not show your disdain towards her? And she said that, maybe it's not my best effort, but, I can't help it. I really can't see how Chad could really stomach her after what she did to her family and blah, blah, blah. So Marlene is just looking at her and shaking her head like I am, right? So she comes back to Chad and gives him a coffee. Didn't bring one for Kat, which I think was just so petty and just spiteful, right? And she said sorry ran out, and I said no, it did not. You just didn't want to give her any. So anyways, before she spoke to Chad, right, Kat was there talking to him about everything going on, and Chad apologized for how Julie treated her, and she said, I'm used to it. She's still angry at what I did to her family, and that's fine. I just need to get going. So Julie asked where she ran off to in such a hurry, and I said, none of your business. So Chad just set her straight that, look, I know you don't care for Kat, and I know you dislike her for what she did to our family and everything, but look, I'd appreciate if you kept it to yourself and your opinions. I know you and Jennifer don't care for her and all that. Keep it to yourself. I don't want to hear it no more, right? So that stung Julie, but I was here for Chad standing up for how he feels. And he said, I know you're protecting me and Abigail's legacy and our marriage and everything, but nobody will ever hold a candle to her. Nobody ever will. But I'm a grown man. I need to move forward, and we are just friends. And she said, I don't think you guys should be friends and whatever. And again, Chad set her straight. And in the end, he did apologize to her for how it may come across. But she said she had to hear it. She always is overstepping. That's who she is and all that. She's just worried about him. And, she was just protecting him and Abigail's marriage and everything. And he just feels as if she just feels as if cat is gonna hurt him and all that. But again, they moved to better positive subjects, and that was the bookstore. And she asked if he wanted to own the bookstore because it's closed down. And he said, why don't you do it? You have nothing much doing, and you always complain about being bored. And she said, I'm retired. I used to own a business back in the day. I don't see myself doing it, but he did give her some insight, and it seems as if she's thinking of owning that bookshop just to really keep the legacy of print media alive and to keep the next generations on reading more books, because obviously books have been dying out, print media has been dying out a lot. Everything is now digital. Everybody's on their laptop, tablets, devices, so nobody's really reading newspapers like how they used to back in the day. So Gabby comes over to Xander for the meeting. Xander was having an erotic dream with him and Sarah. He's missing Sarah as expected. And, she comes in and they're going over, yeah, I guess, the report and that everything is looking good for Gabby Chic. And, Gabby saying that we make a good team. So he asks about Ariana, how she's doing. She says she's holding up, and she thanks him again for, setting up that money for her, kidnapping and everything. So her return and everything from the kidnapping. So he said, anything to help. He knows what it is to, be a parent of an only child and all of that. So he just was trying to help, and she appreciates it. So she said, for my appreciation, I want to take you out for lunch. So he said he's really busy right now, and he sees her hold his hand in a certain type of way. And he's saying that, I'm kind of concerned, like, what are you doing? She said she's showing her appreciation, but he said it's how you're showing it. So she said, I'm not really interested in a date or anything. I just want to we're colleagues, we're just celebrating a business achievement. So how about dinner? Because he said he was swamped with work. He doesn't know if he could have lunch today. So I said, okay, that should be fine. So she said, I know you and Sarah are married still, or unhappily married or whatever. And he said that, we're legally separated. So she said, when since? I said recently, yesterday. And she said, I'm sorry to hear that. And, anyways, he got a call. And it seems as if they're looking into Titan, some business reports and all that. So he's getting really concerned about it all. So he said that, we'll meet up later for dinner, right? So Gabby comes home to Tony and tell her that, look, I'm going to meet up with Xander later for dinner, and I'm going to see, what information he's hiding and all of that, right? Boy, Gabby, I hope Xander does not buy into what you're actually doing, because it's just messed up. But I guess business is business, right? So I know a lot of people like to see Susan in episodes. I don't. I really don't care for Susan's character. She's annoying to me and just acts like a real big buffoon. But anyway, she's there doing her psychic training at the school where she's going to for, I guess, not psychic, but being a medium and everything. And her grandson Johnny came in, and he's trying to say good morning, and he interrupts her, and she gets upset, and he's saying that, I'm sorry, I just was trying to say good morning. She tells him that she's in her school training and everything. So anyways, he talks about his mom being in town. Of course, she doesn't really like Sammy, and she says, hopefully she doesn't try to get into your dad's loins and all of that. So dad said, look, I'm sure no, she's not going to go through that. We all are good. All we care about is our children. And, Johnny said that, look, his mom is not going to be at the trial in any type of way. She's going to keep her distance. And, she's going to go back because, she has to be there for Sydney and all of that. So, Susan is being very conflicted because, for one thing, she doesn't want Sammy near her son, but at the same time, she is upset that Sammy's not gonna be there for Johnny at the trial and all that. So she doesn't know. I don't know what she's trying to say. I don't know if she's trying to make any sense of what she's trying to say. So anyway, she keeps berating Sammy and how EJ, even though he has his flaws, Sammy I guess hides hers in a way. And Johnny was having enough of her just, berating his mom. And then, they talk about how EJ has one good parent, and then Sammy has three good parents, including John. And, Susan is like, John and Roman are very good men and all of that. And Marlena, she's really sweet at heart, but then sometimes she has these bad vibes. And of course, Johnny get really defensive, like, what are you talking about my grandmother for? And then she said, I sent some bad vibes the other day when I was over there. And EJ just distracted her and said, distracted him and said, go look for some papers, get ready for the trial, let me talk to Susan, right? So he talked to her like, what are you up to? Like, why would you berate his mom and his parent, his grandparents in front of him? So she said, she didn't mean to, and she's sad that he's upset with her. She just had these bad vibes when she went over, gave her condolences to Marlena, and she was picking up some bad vibes. And EJ saying like, she's grieving. Come on now, right? So anyway, she goes out and she sees Marlena. She apologizes for how she come across. And Marlena says she's all good. She went to see Sarah and everything checked off good. But then Susan is still picking up bad vibes and she can't seem to pinpoint what's really going on with her internally. So Marlena says she doesn't have enough time for this. She's gonna walk away, so she's begging her not to like leave. She's trying to pick up what's really going on and she can't seem to get the vibe. But Marlena's getting annoyed like to leave, But I'm just really not here for this storyline. You know what I don't understand too? How come Susan don't like Sammy, but yet still she wants to be friends with Sammy's mother? If I was her mother, I wouldn't want to be friends with Susan, honestly. Like, you're not gonna have negative vibes towards my child and then expect us to be friends. But that's just my personal opinion. Anyways, Xander runs into Sarah and they talk briefly about Victoria, how she doing, and Xander's had to be disgusting and talk about how she was hugging up on Brady. And she said, he's saying that the ink doesn't dry on the paper yet. You could have waited until then. And she said, I'm sorry that you don't understand what it means to just be friends and be platonic without any intimacy involved. He was just hugging me, you know. It was just a friendly hug and he brought me a friendly drink and everything. Like, it wasn't much to it, right? So anyways, Xander is like, he doesn't believe that like you cozying up to my nephew and all that. So she said, look, you need to get over yourself because I already have. So that stung him a little bit. But Xander, that was uncalled for because he could have just kept it really civil and just kept it moving. But deep down, we know that they're not over each other. She's not over him, so she needs to get over it, putting up this wall and everything. But that was really it, guys. Comment below your thoughts on today's episode. Let me know what you think. I will see you guys next week. Well, tomorrow.